Welcome to Well-Thing Talks. I am your host, Alicia Castillo-Holly, bringing you real-life conversations from Silicon Valley or somewhere around the world. We will talk about disruptors, angel investments, venture capital, and of course, family offices. Join me along with my children, their families, friends, disruptors, and investors as we explore the fascinating world of creating wealth in a completely different and authentic way. Hello, everyone. It is such pleasure to welcome Jason Bock to our podcast. Jason, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Alicia. Looking forward to the conversation.
So let's just start with what you're doing now. What are you doing now, and how did you get here?
Yeah. Well, as humbly as I can say this, we're curing cancer through cell therapies. So let me explain that. I've had a career in small, medium, and large size biotech and biopharma, developing new medicines to treat a variety of different diseases. I've brought more than 30 different treatments into clinical testing and been fortunate to be involved in bringing several of those to global commercialization with peak market sales of over $3.5 billion. But about 6 years ago now, I became captivated with this modality called cell therapies, where we take a patient's own cells from their blood, from a piece of their tumor, bring that into an advanced manufacturing facility, engineer those cells so that they can target cancer. We reinfuse those into that same patient and have seen remarkable results. And so when I say that, it's not that we do some research, we do some process development, we have regulatory interactions, but every day we're literally making treatments, putting them in IV bags, controlling them as we bring them, as you can see behind me, to MD Anderson Cancer Center, one of the premier cancer centers in the world, and infusing patients with those life-saving treatments. And not every time, but many times, they work remarkably well. And so it's very humbling for me to be able to say that, like, literally, we are manufacturing cures for cancer right now.
Well, I mean, you say that and I get goosebumps. And I remember the first time I met you, that I went to the lab because I used to work in tissue culture and genetics, and I miss that. I'm like, I can't believe this. It's like science fiction. And for those of you that are watching, that is not a picture that you have in your background. That is the Houston Medical Center right there. So you're right there.
Right? That's right. That's right. And that was really with intention. So, prior to moving down to Houston, I lived in Maryland for 20 years and had roles in biotech and biopharma. And then as I was thinking about getting more involved in this cell therapy modality, where, in my view, proximity to patients was going to be very advantageous, was having parallel conversations with some leadership from MD Anderson who was trying to do something new. That's what really captivated me. I was like, you guys have such an amazing ecosystem here for all sorts of cancer treatments and all sorts of medical procedures, but especially for these kinds of cell therapies where the starting material comes from the patient themselves. And so you should be able to take advantage of that situation and impact that entire field. And while they were already involved in this to some extent, they saw the potential for doing even more and being a real leader in this whole new field. And so that's what's exciting. While we are like manufacturing individual treatments for patients day in and day out, we're also helping pushing an entire field forward that we think can have a broad impact on how healthcare is administered. Because these treatments are single dose treatments with curative intent. So the idea isn't that like every 3 weeks you come back and get another treatment, or that every 3 months, it's you get a single dose and that's it. And so, powerful implications for that through the healthcare field of really moving. This is really why we all get into healthcare, I think, or at least me, so that we can move patients not from, hey, in remission, but we can move patients back to just being people. If you have cancer and then you're successfully treated and you never have another treatment again for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you've got your whole life back. That's so important, such a difference than, okay, my cancer's in remission. I have to get a scan every month and just make sure it's at bay. We know it's going to relapse sometime. It's just a matter of when, but at least I have a few more weeks or a few more months with my family. I mean, that's good and okay, but we want to give these patients their entire lives back.
Wow, that is so beautiful and so powerful. And I don't know if you know that my PhD in finance is specifically in life sciences. And life sciences, it's understanding the wealth created from research. And life sciences, in particular, is the only type of investment that the more you know, the more you spend, and the more costly it is for society, and the more costly it is for the government. Whereas in physics, in energy, you optimize things. But in life sciences, what we do is we learn that we don't know enough.
Yeah.
That's it. And then we have to keep going and have to in so many variables. And I think finding out a way to, really get rid of cancer it's life-changing.
Yeah. It's so, just like you said, that reminded me of, in graduate school, I was, in graduate school at the time when we were finishing sequencing the genome, finding all these genes. And then the first company I joined was a company called Human Genome Sciences that was involved in, finishing sequencing the genome and figuring out what all these things did. And there was a prevailing view that, okay, we finished sequencing the genome and we're going to know pretty much everything. And exactly, Alicia, like you said, once we finished sequencing the genome, it only uncovered how much we didn't know.
Yeah.
And like, how does all these pieces fit together? And how is RNA, regulated, and all these different things that we didn't even know about. So every time we peel that onion, we find even more complexity underneath that.
Yeah, and especially nowadays, people need to remember that the purpose of scientific inquiry is to prove that you're wrong,
Yeah.
not to prove that you're right. It
Yes.
changes the communication. So when I'm talking, I mean, and now I'm an investor, so you can imagine, if you are a founder, you cannot be questioning your science because, I mean, can you imagine going, well, we think this is going to be, but the more we research, the more we're going to realize we're wrong. So that doesn't work. But we cannot advance science if we're not open to the possibility that we're wrong. And that has to permeate the whole society because that's how we make progress, not just in science, but in every single aspect.
That's such a great point of having these hypotheses that are testable and that we can prove they're wrong. You usually can't prove something's right, but you can prove it's wrong and then learn from that. That is, the general field of oncology treatments we work on are called immuno-oncology, where we leverage the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what's amazing along the same lines as we're talking about? Let's see, maybe 20, 30 years ago for sure, the prevailing view was that the immune system doesn't have a role in cancer. That's why, the chemotherapies, we knew, poison the immune system, rapidly dividing cells, but we hoped, poison the cancer a little bit more. And there was this small cadre of scientists and researchers and clinicians who really believed in immuno-oncology. One of those was Jim Allison, who's now a professor at MD Anderson, eventually won the Nobel Prize for this, among others, who were adamant that the immune system was going to play a role in oncology. And if you can treat or unlock the immune system, that would be an effective treatment for cancer. But for years, maybe a decade, these guys were outcasts. They talk about how at major cancer meetings, all the guys talking about chemotherapy would get the podium speeches and thousands of people in the big auditorium would listen to them and everything. And these guys would be squirreled away in the basement of the conference center somewhere off on the side, talking amongst each other in a dimly lit room. And then over time, they were proven right. And the thing about unleashing the immune system, that's what can deliver these lasting cures, because it's within you're training your body to attack the cancer rather than giving a totally extrinsic foreign compound that can directly kill the cancer, but then it leaves your body and the cancer is still there, even if it's one cell left. So that's an interesting, very simple read. I don't know whether I've ever mentioned to you this book by Neil Shepard, The Cure Within. Very simple read. You can go through it in a weekend. Each chapter, he interviews one of the leaders in immuno-oncology, and he has a nice way of structuring it where he has a napkin drawing of what their big discovery was. And so you literally see a little hand drawing. And in fairly layman's terms, explains what their big discovery was, but more so, and I think this relates to you, what their journey was. And how did they, each one of them, what was totally inspiring about this is each one of them relates to the valley that they went through or the dark times where no one believed them. And, they had their science and their conviction and had to persevere through this darkness and valley. I think in some ways, like entrepreneurs sometimes do, to get to the other side where they could show that they were really right. And now it's a center pillar of oncology treatment is immuno-oncology. But to your point of we are learning so much more, 30 years ago, it was actively considered not even a concept.
Wow. What's the name of the book again?
The Cure Within.
The Cure Within. I read a book about cancer called Cancer, the Malady of the Emperor of Maladies, which is a classic.
Yes. Okay, maybe I shouldn't share this with a broad audience, but that's been sitting on my coffee table at home. And I've been trying to find time to read it for about 5 years now. But
horrible.
I know.
After FIFA. No, I'll give you the 30 seconds version. Is that he starts working with cancer treatment in Egypt. Think about it. You saw a tumor. What do you want to do? Take it out. What do you do with cancer cells the minute you cut a tumor? Spread them through the blood.
Yeah.
And then he goes into how they found radiotherapy, how they found chemotherapy. It's a very well written book, but it's a thick book.
It's a thick one. I know. That's why it's intimidating.
I know it's a thick book. Yeah, it's a thick book. But it's, now you can get summaries. But it's very well written. So I recommend that too. Yeah. Now let's move now from what you're doing now into just more personal questions. Given your experience now and your trajectory, what is the thing that you have learned personally that you have learned that you didn't know when you were in your 20s? If you were to write yourself a letter, dear Jason, here I am, 30 or 20 or 40 or years later, and I want you to remember this. I want you to be aware of this. What would you write to your younger self?
Mhm. Yeah, such a great question. You know, the thing I would write is something that I think I've done throughout my career, but in the early parts of my career, it was very unintentional. And only more lately have I understood a little bit more why.
Mm-hmm.
And that is very simply to don't be afraid of trying to do really hard things. And actually, the things that are nearly impossible. Um, but those things that somehow you have an insight, an advantage, some leverage on that gives you some leg up on everyone else. Don't do the easy things that everyone else is doing that seem obvious and just be a follow in there. But try and do things that seem really hard, sometimes even maybe even seem impossible at the time. I mean, if we looked back at some of the things going on today and we thought about them 20 years ago, we would have said it was impossible, you know?
Yeah.
So don't be afraid of doing impossible or nearly impossible things. Um, just think intentionally about, do you have an advantage to accomplish those? And so that was something I was drawn to, doing really hard things
Mm-hmm.
throughout
Mm-hmm.
my life. But then, when I set up CTM, when I moved to Houston,
Mm-hmm.
joined MD Anderson and set up CTMC, it sort of all crystallized that, okay, this is going to be something really hard, helping to take these cell therapies that have this curative impact that we talked about, but how can we come up with manufacturing processes to make them very consistent and very reproducible and commercialize them in a cost-effective way? That's really hard. I don't even imagine all the different elements we would have to do to really solve that. But what I can picture is that we're going to have an advantage on that because we're in the number one cancer center in the country, if not the world. This is where all the patients are, huge patient volumes, huge amount of expertise. And, I had some experience in therapeutics development, and how could I leverage that experience in different modalities like monoclonal antibodies and such, and not replicate that experience, but leverage that experience to a fit for purpose model for how to develop cell therapies. I don't know exactly what that's going to turn out to be. I didn't know what it was going to turn out to be when I moved to Houston, but I thought we had the right elements in place to do something in a very differentiated way. And so I don't know, there's a bunch of lessons in there about doing hard things, maybe not having. I think sometimes it's important. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but sometimes it's important not to have that definitive a 5-year plan, but like to know you're moving in a certain direction and be open to different opportunities along the way. When I moved down to Houston, it wasn't with the intention of actually growing this into CTMC and exactly what we've turned into. I didn't have a specific vision, but I knew we could impact the field somehow, and the right elements in place. If we just put those into a pot and mix them together and kept making good decisions, something interesting would come from that. Something impactful would come from that. Something that created value would come from that.
Well, that's very interesting. I have to move, or I have chosen uh, to move many times, and I have no clue what's going
Yeah.
to happen. I just have to say, well, I'm going to do my best and my poor kids. And I have a horrible sense of direction. So the joke in the family is, Mom, do you know where we're going? And I would invariably say, forward.
Nice.
And they say, but do you know? I have no clue. In one country, the mountain is on the north and the ocean is on the other side of the mountain. That's in Venezuela where I grew up. But then I moved to Boston and the mountain is one side and the ocean is in the other side. Then I moved to Switzerland and there's mountains all over. I mean, and then Western Australia and then Denmark and then Houston and California. So, it's just, I've gotten better. It's a miracle. I have no clue how. But sometimes you just have to keep going and you just figure it out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes a very targeted vision can create a sense of comfort. Like, okay, we know exactly what our 5-year plan is, and like, okay, step by step, okay, we got it. I think unintentionally, though, that can create some blinders or tunnel vision, because it's an interesting match of focus versus openness to opportunities. And so, like, when we first formed CTMC, we acquired this facility from a local biotech company when I was part of MD Anderson, and that alone was like, okay, that was a surprise. I'll tell you this story real quick. When I was being recruited to MD Anderson, well, first nobody really had a vision of what we were going to create. I was sort of surprised. I thought I was interviewing for a position with the chief scientific officer, and I thought they really had a plan. And I kept sort of during the recruiting, like ask him, and like I was in industry, it was an academic. So I'm like, okay, maybe they just like, it's a little mushy, but still, I think the right elements are in place, like we talked about before. And then finally, I got here. I'd been running like a 600-person research, development, commercialization site in large pharma, right? So I like had a pretty structured view of things and understand how big companies work and medium-sized companies. And I talked to my boss, my new boss, the chief scientific officer, is an amazing guy. And I'm like, okay, this was like the last interview, and we're really trying to, like, what does really success look like to you? Jason, great question. Let me tell you exactly what success looks like to me. He's like, we're going to hire you. You're going to come down here and you're going to figure everything out.
And that's it.
And of course, like, that was so appealing. But that was really the plan, Alicia. That was like the extent of the. So I moved down here, started to work with some investigators at MD Anderson. There was a little bit more of a plan that I led on, but then we became aware of this facility. And it was already in play that the biotech company wanted to divest it and had been talking with different people to acquire it for 6 months. And we're down to like a week left to decide when I heard about it, because I just moved to Houston. And then I saw it. I was like, oh my God, this would be amazing. It wasn't even like part of the plan, but I said, this could jumpstart us quite a bit. And we were able to see the facility, put together a very competitive bid, not necessarily the highest cash bid, but we were able to meet the biotech company with what they really needed. And within a week, we were able to jump to the front of the line.
Wow.
And got MD Anderson. I give leadership a tremendous amount of credit for being willing to move quickly. And so that's sort of it. If I had a very narrow vision of what we want to do, and someone was like, oh, I heard there was a biotech facility that's looking to divest their facility. I'm like, okay, that's not my plan. I've got this deal to do. I'm working with this professor on this thing. Like,
yeah,
I was like, that could be really interesting. That could open up some new possibilities. And it was a game changer. It accelerated our plans by many years by being open to that. And then when we acquired this facility, at first we were going to work just with MD Anderson investigators to help them industrialize their therapies and make them more ready for commercialization. But then when we acquired the facility and people heard about it, several venture capitalists, board members, CEOs reached out and were like, what are you guys doing? What's MD Anderson doing acquiring like industrial facilities? And what do you guys got planned? And we sort of told them, and they're like, is there a way we can collaborate? And so we created a very intentional and fit for purpose model for collaborating with biotech companies then to where we help accelerate their products, getting to patients and being ready for commercialization. And they could have a very capital efficient model for developing their products rather than having to raise $150 million for every product and building redundant capabilities along with every other biotech company. That wasn't part of our plan at all. But as it became an opportunity, we were able to jump on it. And so that's why it was an interesting thing of have an idea, have a general direction you want to go, keep moving forward. I'll tell you like that part of your story. But do so in a way that you keep a wide perspective on what are other opportunities and be able to jump on those and pivot to even bigger things as they become available.
You know, you say that and I get goosebumps because one of the things that I know is somebody's going to be listening to this, and this is exactly the conversation that they need to have in their mind. And that's why I do the podcast, because there's so much wisdom and real examples. And I mean, we're people. We're just real people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I find in listening to your podcast or reading books is there's certain themes that once you hear them, they resonate. They like, wait a minute, I totally get it. And it like clicks into place some things that you've been thinking about, or maybe are in the back of your head almost subconsciously. But when you hear somebody else verbalize them or you read it in a book, suddenly you're like, yes, that's it. You know, and now I was sort of doing that all the time, but I didn't really realize it or I didn't understand it. But now I got it now. Really helps.
Yes, and there might be some other opportunities people are overlooking because they're just very focused. So yeah, I mean, I like to be focused or I like to be intentional, but sometimes just into creativity requires an open mind and looking, and sometimes it doesn't work. We don't know, but we need to be open to that. Thank you for that. Well, I always enjoy talking to you. So this is fun. And I can share that with my friends and with people that are listening. So
we have some great conversations.
Yeah, we have some great conversations. I don't want to make this too long, but I do want people to understand with more details, what do you mean by cell therapies? Because I had lunch yesterday with a scientist in physics, and I was telling them about what you're doing. And they were coming up with some very physics-oriented approaches that, you know, I might put you two in touch because there might be some synergies there.
Sure.
But so you go to the patients, you extract the cells. So give us like the 1 minute, very detailed description of what you mean by cell therapies.
Yeah. And in our context, I'll give the kinds of cell therapies we work on. It's a pretty broad field, but the ones we work on are primarily revolving around a subset of immune cells called T cells. These are really the main orchestrators of an immune response. They both directly kill invading cells, tumor cells, as well as signal the rest of the immune system that there's something wrong here and we need to attack. So T cells are central to any immune response. And so we start with T cells either from a blood sample, or we can extract the T cells from a tumor sample. We can bring them into the lab, engineer them in a certain way that gives them an advantage against or a targeting to the cancer cells. expand them, and then reinfuse them to the same patient. And so it's basically, our view, it's a very almost natural kind of medicine, or I want to say like homeopathic, but these T cells are like specifically, let's call one of the treatments we produce is called TIL, tumor infiltrating lymphocytes. And so we take a piece of the tumor, we extract out the T cells that are already in there. They're already trying to fight the cancer. But it's essentially our Darwinian battle. The reason we have a tumor, patients who have cancer, is because these cells have become dysregulated, yeah, and they grow out of control, and they found ways to either hide from or downregulate the immune system. So the immune system is mounting a response. That's why we all don't get cancer all the time, thank God. But for some reason in these patients, the cancer is sort of winning. And so all we're trying to do in many ways in the big picture is tilt the balance back on the side of the good guys and give those T cells a bump up in their fight against the cancer. And we can do that in a number of ways by targeting them more specifically to antigens. That's like CAR T cells that have become very well known now, or by increasing the fitness of these immune cells to be able to kill more cancer cells at a time.
And then you grow them and then you inject it back into the patient.
That's right. That's right.
So just for the audience, you cannot do that from one patient to another patient.
Yeah, it turns out the immune system is very, very good about detecting other people's cells and recognize it as foreign invaders. And so part of the reason this works so well is because we use a patient's own cells. And to be honest, it's also very empowering for a patient to feel that their cells, we're just giving them a boost, but it's really your cells that are doing the fighting. And we're not injecting you with some chemicals that were made at a plant somewhere or something. It is your own cells. They're just losing the battle and need a little bit of a bump up. And then we're going to give you that ability to fight off that cancer. So, patients come along for the journey because they, come into the hospital, give this sample, takes us a few weeks to manufacture these. And so people, the patients get very engaged in the process, like, are my cells growing? How are they doing?
My babies.
Yeah, exactly. We had this one patient who came back and talked to us, and she said, yeah, I was like, Jason, overall for you and the team, you've been fantastic. I'm in stable disease now and doing very well. So like, thank you from the bottom of my heart. The doctor told me my cells grew okay, but not too well. So, I'm a little disappointed that my cells didn't do better in the lab for you, but I'll try and do better next time. But it's really the patients come along with the journey. And I think that, mind is so important in when you're fighting diseases. So I think that plays a role too.
No, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love it. I love it. Let me wrap this up with, of course, being a scientist, I love these conversations because it's like, I start actually, and I've seen the lab, so we should probably put a picture of the lab. It's like, this is where they do these things. So let's wrap this up with something that again is personal. I think I told you that I died when I was 13, but I didn't die fully. I came back. Yeah. So I always think, well, and this is my last question always. I, since very young, I thought, my time here, as I know, my conscious time is going to end. Is finite or finite is that? I don't know how to pronounce that in English. Can you believe that? It's finito in Spanish, but
oh yeah, finite is exactly right.
Finite. It's not finito. But
finito actually sounds
Italiano. Yeah. And like Romeo and Juliet. But So my question has always been, what am I here to do? Why am I here? And then what do I leave behind? And for the people that are here that might never have the opportunity to meet you, not because you're going to die, but because you're so far away, um, what is your essence? Who are you when people cannot reach you in time and in space? And with that, I want to end this very interesting
Mm,
podcast.
well, yeah, very interesting and deep question, of course. I mean, as someone who has died, Alicia, um, you know, you, at a young age had an acute perspective of like the most important thing that we all take for granted every day is our health and our life.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like my center purpose is to have a positive impact on that for people that I don't even know, or I mean, God forbid, people I do know. And so, you know, going through all the schooling, going through all the training, always the central focus why I chose to study biology was I thought it was pretty interesting, amazing science and everything, but really because it was going to impact patients' lives and health. And I try and always keep that in center focus. Um, that I feel so privileged
Mm-hmm.
to have been able to work on so many products that we've tried. Drug development is really hard, so we've brought in a lot of great products into the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but when you bring a product to commercialization and you see like on Facebook, the forums, the chat groups around the drug that you worked on from concept through all of these clinical trials and hurdles and manufacturing challenges, and then patients are talking about how it impacted their lives, how it impacted their families, how it changed. I think, again, humbly speaking, I mean, I like to think that my essence goes through each of those impacted patients, and their ability to live their lives, even though they never know me or anything, but that we want to develop products and medicines that wouldn't have been developed without us. I have stories about like the drugs I worked on that made it through to commercialization. I know for a fact that if we didn't make certain decisions, if we took a different path, those wouldn't be commercial products today, and they wouldn't have had an impact on those patients who took them. That's an incredible honor to have that kind of responsibility. I take that incredibly seriously and try to make every decision with that intention in mind.
What a great way to end the podcast and to make us reflect about how privileged we are
Yeah,
to live, to live.
yeah, for
How do
sure.
people contact you?
Yeah, probably through email, JB Bock, JBOCK at CTMC.com, or can reach me on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I'm going to start charging LinkedIn because everybody's using that, but they
yeah,
should be sponsoring these.
you
Yeah.
should get a
Yeah.
sponsorship there.
Yeah. Well, Jason, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. I love what you're doing, and thank you for doing that for all the cancer patients and for science in general.
Thank you for the opportunity again, Alicia. As I mentioned the last time when we had dinner, every time I talk with you, I see things from a different perspective, and that I really appreciate that. So thank you for that.
A pleasure. Well, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I'm a big fan of Jason because it reminded me so much about my own trajectory when I was a scientist and I joined Bayer and Shell, then I did an MBA, then I went and worked for Sibagagi, and then, but then I left and I became a founder and I became an entrepreneur and then I became an investor. And we have the most fascinating conversations about the flow of wealth and how research influences the wealth that is created. In the particular case of life sciences, it creates a lot of new challenges for governments and for society at large, because the old processes become obsolete, but the government has to regulate that and the insurance has to be involved. So life sciences research creates more problems as we continue to research, but we still continue to research because a new element comes into play, and those are the private investors and the private donors. I hope you enjoy this conversation. It is time that we find ways to cure cancer for real, and I'm very, very excited to be able to give you access to these fascinating technologies. This is your host, Alicia Castillo-Holly, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in to our Wealthing Talks. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. To stay connected, visit us at wealthing.com. This is Alicia Castillo-Holly, your host, and until next time, yours in Wealthing.